Scott Zimmerman, thank you so much for joining the Quantum Connection podcast. We really, really appreciate you being here today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
welcome, Scott. So we just started to get into your origin story, and I'm like, no, let's record. So let's just rewind just a little bit. And how did you end up here? Like, where's the most juicy part you want to begin?
Well, I've been doing lighting and displays for 40 years. Everything from night vision systems for aircraft
Hmm.
to and helicopters. Then I started working in lighting directly. I've had kind of a career of working with some really amazing people. I guess I'd say that's actually my little forte is that I can seem to be able to have a conversation with some of the experts, and they not throw me out of the room type stuff. But uh, but no, I started working in this area. I was just looking at lighting, and like I say, I've been doing it for decades. And I started out working. I went and talked to um, Hamlin about near infrared and PBM, and then I started working with Russ Reiter on trying to understand how melatonin was affected by light. And then I've worked up to doing some work on during COVID, trying to understand how 99% of all the disease transfers occurred indoors and almost nothing occurred outdoors.
Wow.
So nature is, yeah, you do those numbers, and I don't mean this flippantly, but if we really could understand, and this was actually said by the one guy at CDC years ago, we really understood what the difference was, what was causing seasonality and flu, it'd be more effective than any vaccine we've ever invented.
Right.
And
Everyone's getting sick in the winter, but nobody goes, duh, because we're all
yeah,
inside so darn much.
yeah, and and then I had my granddaughter got neuroblastoma, and there was some work that's kind of that I've been trying to do to try and show, hey, maybe you're not going to stop having to do chemo, but you might be able to use less, or maybe something that when time of day when you give chemo, things of that nature.
Hmm.
So that kind of got me more and more into it, and
So just Scott, I don't mean to interrupt you in that, but is there because obviously the time we take medications and use supplements and things like that actually does matter, right? Into circadian rhythms. Did you find there was a time of day better for taking medications in your research and things like that?
well, my research was mainly trying to understand what the process that cancer goes through.
Yeah.
I don't really, and first and foremost, I'm not a doctor, so I don't
Yeah.
project anything as far as what should be done. I just was interested in the optics
Hmm.
because, you know, children in particular are much more impacted by sunlight than adults are, simply because they're smaller.
Hmm.
So almost 100% of their cells, you
Mm.
see Glenn's latest work that he's published where he's showing transmission through the torso for various wavelengths. Well, in a child, it's even, it's orders of magnitude more. So almost 100% of their cells are engaged with sunlight in one way or the other, positively or negatively. And one of the frustrations is that with cancer treatments is that it's a more of a hand-me-down approach. Adults, they do stuff on adults
Right.
for obvious reasons, and then what they try and scale it back for children. Basically, they don't really. Children are a much different thing, both optically and the fact that they're going through a growth. So the cancer is associated with growth versus adults, it's usually decline.
Hmm.
And so there's a lot that we could learn, and the deeper I dig into understanding how light interacts with the human body, the more fascinating it is how complex and interconnected all of it is. And so I've come to the conclusion, based on all this work that I've been doing and working with Glenn and Bob in particular, Glenn's showing that, hey, if I put an incandescent bulb in a room filled with LEDs, clear near where I'm working, um, all of a sudden we're seeing that your eyesight color contrast is better within a matter of weeks, and then
Even
it
though the
lasts.
LEDs are still there.
even though the LEDs are still there.
That's powerful.
And
Like,
well,
so
and if I could explain a little bit why,
yeah.
and not to make a commercial, but it's basically why we do what we do for our lighting
Please.
is that sunlight, incandescent is not the same as sunlight. LEDs are not the same as sunlight. LEDs are doing just mainly the visible part of the spectrum, a very narrow band between 400 and 700 nanometers. And then incandescent is going everywhere from 700 out to almost 6,000 nanometers. And when I first started doing it, like I say, I was talking to Hamlin, I was looking at some of his levels that he was using to get various treatment, positive results. And I came to the conclusion that, well, wait a minute, that's the same level that we had in a well-lit incandescent room,
Mm-hmm.
but it was spread out over a wider thing. Understand that most of the PBM work is being done basically because that's availability of infrared or near infrared LEDs, not because it's the best approach. In fact, in order to get um, things to really work with PBM, you have to go to dosage levels that are peak levels that are much higher than sunlight because so much of it is spread out within the body that you get very little benefit. When you get into the longer wavelengths that we're focused on now, all of a sudden you find that it perfectly aligns with a lot of the biological processes in the body. But we can talk about that a little bit later. But, so that's kind of how I got into where I'm at. And it's only because I got to interface with some amazing people. You know, Glenn's doing all his work where for years he's been doing showing how flies do better under different kinds of wavelengths of light and all this. And now he's doing it with humans and he's doing some amazing thing with children. And then working with Bob Fosbury, there's nothing better than an astrophysicist to sit there and tell you about something about sunlight. Um, and of course, I'm looking at it from an optics standpoint because amazingly, when I first got into this with Russ and others, it was surprising to me that this wasn't already well researched. You know, the how light penetrates into the body is very complex, and it integrates in it essentially ties in with a lot of the biological processes. And so it's kind of one of those things you start out, everybody can understand the visible portion. Then you add a little bit in called PBM or near infrared, which is really only 700 to maybe 900 nanometers. And then you start going out further, and it's really a limitation more of our ability to measure it because it's we don't have the detectors as reprev as easy. I mean, it could, to actually measure our light sources out to into the far infrared, you're talking about thousands of dollars worth of cost just to get somebody to measure it. So it's we're going through this kind of this process now of all of a sudden we're seeing there's structure out here and that X aligns with this and that aligns with that. So it's the most fun, from a nerdy technical geek thing to do because it's like you're discovering a whole new world.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, once you look at that, and I did a roundtable for the Guy Foundation, and I sent you some of those pictures, some of those slides. But it's just one of the things is that now that we're looking at it in a different way, thanks to Bob's astrophysics type background, all of a sudden we're seeing that, hey, this happens to line up with the first stage of the electron transport chain as far as energy levels. Isn't that amazing? And then, there's another gap here where there's another window that transmits out at, 2 microns. And that happens to align with a third portion of the electron transport chain. And so, you start to see the effect of an adaptation over millions and millions of years. And then we come in with a meat cleaver and we chop off 90% of the spectrum and are surprised that we're having these negative effects. So
Great metaphor. Great metaphor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because most of us are living indoors, right?
Hmm.
And we're living under LED lights, right? In our schools, in our hospitals, in any place you go, Whole Foods, wherever you go, right? And most of us are not thinking about, well, where's the infrared that I'm supposed to be getting in my daily life, right? Nobody thinks about. I mean, if you're in the quantum biology space, right? We don't realize. Like I always think of it like this. So I don't know the exact numbers, but around 50% of the sunlight spectrum is infrared, right? That tells
Right.
me that's a really important piece of light that we need and our biology needs on the daily regular because they're meant to be outside each and every day, right? Under that light spectrum. But most of us are indoors with LEDs and lighting that doesn't support that infrared. And we're going to talk about why infrared is so important for us. So, what I try to do, and I know Heather does, and I'm sure you do too, I try to put healthy lighting in my environment when I'm indoors. We can have a conversation too about whether or not the modern glass is blocking, that infrared from coming into our environment. Also, I try to have doors and windows open when I can to let some of that light in. I try to have an incandescent bulb. I mean, I have a red panel going. I try to bring infrared back into my indoor lighting environment to support all the cellular functioning that we're going to talk about, like blood sugar and subcellular melatonin, right? And energy production, right? These are all important things or signals or inputs that I'm actually would be getting if I was outside in that light, right?
Yeah. And I totally agree. And the problem gets in is that marketing gets involved in a lot of the process.
Yeah.
And it makes it very hard to separate out. It's like, you know, to me, the PBM and works for people, great. But my concern is the PBM, we are adapted to respond if the car comes down or you're looking at the sun, you glance away. But in PBM, there's not that eye response. And especially in the US, if a little bit's good, more is better. So you see this rapid expansion in more and more intensity, more and more brightness. And like I say, I mean, it's clear that the 700 to 900 or 1,000 nanometer regime is important. It does things. But, if you get some of these panels and you get them up in front of your face, and you happen to be looking at them, you're going to think that they're not very bright when they're 10 times brighter than what you're used to in a looking at a car light or whatever, or, headlights. And like I say, there's no glance away response. So I'm concerned that people are going to get,
Extent what you're saying.
yeah, over years, there's going to be a degradation in their optical, in their eye.
And
A
you're
little
talking
bit,
about, just so
it's,
people are clear, I want people to understand you're talking about photobiomodulation devices.
Yeah, red light
yeah,
devices. When you say panels, that's what I'm hearing. And so I
Yeah.
really appreciate your truth, your honesty, and your candor because
Yeah.
that field is exploding, that market is exploding, and you can't just
Hmm.
intervene and like try to emulate nature and then not expect some sort of negative consequence somewhere along the way. So that's what you're speaking
Agreed.
to.
yeah. And like I say, I mean, you're doing like Bob, he had an ulcer on his ankle. And one time he took some 850 and he was able to make the ulcer go away. He then had another ulcer and he took an incandescent bulb and set it at knowing the distance to put it, and it went away. And in fact, it went away a little faster than the PBM stuff it appeared. So, that's what I guess my big concern is back in the old laser jocks, you always had the laser jock that had lost sight in one eye because he happened to not know where the infrared beam was going or whatever. And I'm just concerned that there's this big push to get bigger and bigger and brighter, and long term that can have some really negative effects. And
You are a fan of
so,
wearing goggles that people use photomodulation?
What? I
say
can't hear you,
what?
Vanessa.
Goggles. Are you a fan of people wearing the goggles when people use photomodulation? Like using the people get the goggles when they use red light therapy. Are you a fan of that?
Well, I mean, at the right levels, I think there's a benefit, but
Yeah.
again, we don't understand all the different things that are being affected by that
Yeah.
exposure. And again, like I say, there's just this natural tendency to more is better. And whereas I guess what I'm trying to say is that PBM is just a small little section of the solar spectrum. We call it the I and Y bands in astronomers' terms. There's a series of 8 bands that go out into the infrared that we now know of thanks to the astronomers and Bob and people like that. And it's like we've got these little flashlights at different wavelengths, and the body's adapted to expect those different flashlights. So when people say that, like us, we make a light bulb that has filaments in the little filaments in here for the infrared and LEDs on things. That is actually a much closer match to sunlight than either one of them. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is everybody sees with their eyes. It's easy to trick the eye. And so people can the LEDs contain none of these things we're talking about. And so, at the end of the day, people, I've seen panels that I wouldn't put a child in front of it, that's for sure. And what are they doing? Most of them are driving to higher and higher brightness because that means they have to spend less and less time so they can charge more per office visit and all this other stuff. Not being negative towards, people are trying to do that. Some people find great benefit, but I'm more interested in trying to mimic what sunlight does. And, and that comes into a bunch of stuff of measurement limitations. We're being flooded now with everybody's getting these little spectrometers that measure out to 900 nanometers or 1,000 nanometers. And they don't know what they're measuring, basically, in fact, but it's very misleading because it's on a linear scale. It's not almost all the processes in the body are logarithmic. Your eyesight, your hearing, your nose has to be responding to orders, 9 orders of magnitude change from sunlight down to darkness, or how you smell or how you hear or think the range of audio. So, when you start seeing some of these graphs that people are putting out that are all on linear scales, it's great marketing, but it doesn't tell you anything. So it's hard because you have to get people to understand measurement is what I do. And it's frustrating to see people walking around showing this graph or that graph, over a limited. Oh, look what this is doing. Yeah, but look what else it's doing, when you're doing it. So that's kind of the geeky side of the whole thing that gets to be frustrating. But
whenever you take sections of things and you're just looking at one thing and you forget the holistic approach, you're going to have a consequence, right? So tell
exactly.
us about though, the health benefits of red light, near infrared and all, tell us about why we should even care about this.
Well, if the number one is we're starting. Unfortunately, when this whole thing started way back when they decided to convert to LEDs, nobody ever bothered to even compare an LED to an incandescent over a wide range of biological processes. Well, now what we're figuring out is that all the wavelengths in sunlight are being used in one form or another. And one of the classic ones that Glenn's just now doing is he's put somebody in there, puts a little bit of infrared in with and compares it to the LEDs alone, which should have happened 20 years ago. And all of a sudden he's seeing that within a matter of days, your color contrast degrades under LEDs, but doesn't degrade under incandescents. So why in the heck?
Can I just interrupt you? Color contrast. My health coach had me take a visual, I don't know if it's the same thing, but it was some kind of visual contrast test, and that can tell us a lot about our health. Is that why they do it, use that measurement?
Yeah, well, Glenn's like the world's expert on you doing with the eye as far as, its characteristics. And so he had a very well-defined test that's been used for decades. And he said, let's just try adding some infrared in and taking infrared out. and doing just LEDs. And lo and behold, he'll publish here hopefully in another little bit, but he's finding huge changes in your color contrast because you're not getting the full spectrum. Incandescents give you more of the infrared, very little of the visible. Cost you a lot of money cost you money because they're not very efficient at generating what we see with our eye. But once you introduce it and start looking at some of these biological processes, all of a sudden you'll see that there's a change that hadn't been anticipated. It's like testosterone. It's very clear that sunlight enhances testosterone levels. Us moving indoors under LEDs is suppressing testosterone levels. And so, who knows? That's not been
Gin.
characterized how bad it is. What?
And estrogen then is higher, I feel like, as well, right? Isn't that I've heard that before? Then the estrogen is higher. The testosterone is lower, but the estrogen is higher. So, yeah.
Yeah, and what hit me is that, why wouldn't this be like a big deal? Because I mean,
Something
we're
huge.
literally, it is. I mean, you think about it. The dimorphic ratio between men and women defines the difference between a man and a woman. We are altering that and have been for generations, perfectly aligned with, correlated with the change in lighting situation. People don't spend time out like they used to. Guys are losing, have in 2 generations have reduced their testosterone levels 50% relative to their grandfather. Women are being affected with estrogen, and I'm sitting here and I'm looking at this data. They take guys out, put them in sunlight, measure the testosterone level, it goes up. It's not rocket science that this gender confusion. I mean, I would argue that, they're right. There is actually a physiological thing that's been going on that is changing our definition of male versus female. And that to me is hugely scary, because how do you define that and how do you separate that from other environmental effects, be it, plasticizers or things like that. But the one thing I would argue is that it's kind of like diet. We keep on trying to get RFK Jr. to look at something besides diet from the standpoint of,
Yes.
there are thousands of diets out there. Some people live off of just rice, they survive. But the one thing that's been changing has been our ability to get out in sunlight, and we're not doing it. And we're putting ourselves in an environment that, is cortisol heavy.
Mhm.
The one thing about visible light, we have cortisol. Cortisol is supposed to respond to danger and be part of our alerting system. So what do? We put the little kids in these rooms and they give them a video game, and we sit there and we flash them with blue and green and red light all the time for an extended period of time. And we're surprised that they have a hormone shift. I don't think that that's that hard of a jump. And to me, the correlation, I know it's still a correlation, but the correlation between when we started introducing or eliminating spectrum, almost perfectly aligns with this increase in a whole bunch of metabolic diseases. And all I've been trying to do is understand mechanistically, because I can't go run a study. I can't afford to go run a study that proves one thing or another. And even then, you doubt the data if you wanted to. But if we look at the mechanisms of how light actually is being used by the body, then you can at least say, that kind of makes sense, or it doesn't make sense. And I think that's where we're really getting to right now is start out with visible, spent most of my life there, started looking at near infrared, which I define as 700 to 900 or 1,000 nanometers. Now we're looking at this region from 1,000 nanometers to 6,000 nanometers. And all of a sudden you see it starts aligning with all these biological processes, that they use the same amount of energy to do what they do. And so, there's a chance that what we can do is we can maybe do something to be more proactive or positive, especially this. And lo and behold, if you put cancer cells in this thing, they're shifted into a different wavelength range than healthy cells. So to me, it's got a lot of promise. Problem is that the big pharma does not want anybody coming up with some way to enhance, cut down on the amount of chemo or whatever that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
But so many of the things that were, and yeah, that I guess that's what I'd say is that
It's like,
you're on my bandwagon subject, I guess is what
Yeah,
I'd say.
perfect.
yes, yes, absolutely. Can you guys hear me good? Can you hear
Yeah.
me? Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I love everything you said because it's like so true. I mean, the cortisol dysregulation, the nervous system dysregulation, sky high in children. And where are the children all day long? They're either in front of video games or they're in the school environment, which is not healthy lighting either, right? So those are the new places where they are. They're not outside playing like as much as they used to, right? And that's where they need to be. And I mean, the whole message here of everything you said is like, go outside and spend more time outside. Like that's the whole message of everything you're saying, that your hormones, you're going to be more in balance, your nervous system's going to be more in balance, you're going to have more energy, you're going to feel better, you're going to sleep better. Like everything gets better. Just like we and the thing about the diet thing, that was so great too, because we're always going to the diets and nobody's thinking about light. And it's like it can make such an impact. You don't have to change what you're eating. Just change the lighting, change the time outside, and it can make this huge, huge impact. So I just everything you were saying, I was just like cheerleading. I was loving it. So
Well, one of the things that when you get into circadian, and this comes into the issues of measurements, um, I'll be honest with you, I'm not a big circadian fan from the standpoint of the technology. Um, what we do is we take somebody and we make him lay down, be real quiet, said the DLMO, and we're basically trying to measure the change in melatonin and cortisol, or in
right.
melatonin and cortisol. And you do get, under those conditions, you get this gentle slope of high cortisol in the morning, low melatonin, low down into the melatonin drop that comes up at night. Cortisol is
Mhm.
supposed to drop. The problem with this, and this is what Russ showed me early on, is hit somebody with a stick during any of that period. All of a
Oh,
sudden, everything changes.
Yep.
And what got me going is that there's a new set of biosensors that are coming out from Cordy in license, where they give you a simultaneous measurement. And bear in mind that most of the circadian, they measure it every hour, maybe 4 hours or whatever, and you see this nice gentle slope. But what it's turning out is that's very much like taking a tennis ball in your hand, take a picture, throw it up in the air, catch the tennis ball, take another picture. They're doing it on such a low time scale that they're our sampling frequency, that they're missing everything that's going on. With these new sensors, we're able to measure every 3 minutes the cortisol and melatonin level in sweat. And all of a sudden, what you see is all kinds of things going on. Like my wife and
Mm.
I went out to dinner, and we were in a really great Mexican restaurant in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, of all places. But anyway, we were going out to dinner, and I had with sweat sensor on. Now I don't know what the sensor is reading until I actually download it, so I wasn't
Okay.
paying any attention. But you could literally see the appetizer and the main course on my cortisol levels as I was eating. Then out of over an hour long period. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there was a melatonin spike that went up,
Hmm.
and it actually drove the cortisol level back down to my baseline. Now, none of that comes
Mm.
under the heading of circadian, you know. So, and I'm not saying that there isn't a general tendency of wanting to convince you to get into this rhythm. It's probably good for you. But built on top of that is all this transient response stuff that nobody's been measuring and
That's the
nobody's
first I've
taken
ever
into.
heard of it myself, so I'm so grateful you're sharing this
Yeah.
because we get so locked in our special box, right? Like it has to be this way, and oh my God, what if you don't see the sunrise every morning, and you're not setting your circadian rhythm, and so what you're saying is it's like we're way more fluid and adaptable, and our body's doing all kinds of different things that we're not even aware of all the time.
Yeah, I mean, there was a great study where they they were actually doing taking people to understand how they survive in diamond mines way down deep in the heat.
Wow.
And what they did is that they did this gentleman, Theron, did a stair stepper test for 4 hours. These people were on stair steppers. And they were tough patients, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
But he monitored on a regular basis their plasma melatonin. Now, this was at 9 o'clock in the morning. First thing that happens once they got on a stair stepper is they saw a spike of 200 picograms per milliliter of melatonin. And then another set of tests showed that cortisol was doing the same thing. So what's happening is that yes, there is this general diurnal effect, but what you do has a bigger effect than what that is even trying to create or help process. What was really fascinating is that the cortisol, depended on whether you're a good athlete or a bad athlete or not an athlete, your
Oh,
cortisol dropped off fairly quickly, even during the
yeah,
exercise, if you're a good athlete. If you're a
that makes
bad
sense.
athlete, it kept on going on. But then once you
Mm,
stopped the exercise, it dropped. But instead of the melatonin seemed to linger. And if you've ever had the experience of doing a really great workout and saying, wow, I'm a little tired after that. Or if you think about you've been at the beach all day and you come out and say, boy, it kind of drained me. I feel a little tired. Or,
yeah.
I ate a big meal. I feel a little tired. Well, I would argue that it's this melatonin tail that the
Yeah.
body has basically put in place to deal with the damage you've essentially, or the reactive oxygen species that you've
Right.
generated during those things. So,
That's
there's
why
all
I
these.
wanted to interrupt you, Scott, but that was exactly what I was thinking. I was like, well, if you're really doing a hard exercise or doing a lot of, your body's going to need to start repairing things. And what does melatonin do? It repairs things, right? So to me, that was exactly my thought. And there's obviously a correlation between exercise and melatonin. I know I've heard that before, that it helps you make more melatonin or helps generate melatonin. I've heard that before. But it also was, I know that you guys have done research, you and, Russell Reiter have done research about, different kinds of melatonin, right? There's the melatonin, like the more in the cell, and there's melatonin that makes you sleepy, right? There's pineal gland versus subcellular melatonin and what that's doing. So maybe speak a little bit about that. Is that
Well, I
helpful?
published a paper with Russ where we used the Theron data in particular and showed that there was this transient response that, and we're talking about in a matter of 10 or 20 minutes at 9 o'clock in the morning. So it makes the
Hmm.
biggest argument that the melatonin has to be generated someplace else than the pineal gland.
Hmm.
And not knocking the pineal gland, it's fairly clear that as we go to sleep, the pineal gland kicks out some excess melatonin because the brain's still operating at 80% of its efficiency or 80% of its maximum capability. And you've got all these cells out there. It's a perfect time to dump a little extra melatonin into the cells out there. But it's clear that, pineal gland is not generating high levels of melatonin at 9 o'clock in the morning during exercise. And so the whole point is that circadian is built on this fairly simplistic view that the pineal gland is, the SCN is responding, telling the pineal gland to this. I would argue that it's almost backwards. The SCN is sampling, essentially getting information out there and
Mm,
deciding how much more to kick out or how far to push,
interesting.
type thing, rather than being the grand master of all things that
Mm.
seems to come out. And I'm sure I'll get shot in the for saying that, but I
I love your
that's my argument with the surrogate. If your data if you're not sampling fast enough to see what's going on, it's pretty hard to get things to jive up with the body, because the body is, think about it just from a control standpoint. You have something that happens on your arm. You can't wait around for the to go up to the brain, say something, come here, let's go. And most likely, if you do a response, it's a systemic response rather than a local response. So it's probably the wrong response. It's not like it comes at the wrong time, it's the wrong thing. So I think that we've underestimated how complex the control systems are and the response levels are. The skin is absolutely the most amazing organ in the body. It's on the outside, but it can generate vitamin D directly. It can generate all the cholesterols, all the steroids, all the testosterone without shipping it in, because if it needs it. And so, we've underestimated what the skin is capable of doing. And you think about it, it has to. It has to
It is the
respond to something.
receiver for the light. The skin is the receiver for all the light we take in, right?
Yeah, yeah. And that's been one of the coolest thing about doing the work, or looking at how skin and how light penetrates. People think that, well, I'll give you this one because I think it's such a cool thing optically. People think of UV and generating vitamin D. Okay. Well, if you look at it optically, the infrared portion that we got rid of is been shown to generate a high level of hydrogen peroxide in the outer skin. So we have this barrier effect, but it's in the same 50 microns that we're doing the UV conversion of cholesterol for vitamin D and all these other steroids. It turns out that it's very hard to um, to oxidize melanin, but in the outer part of the 50 microns of the skin, what appears to be going on based on the work of Yakimov and others, the melanin is being oxidized. Well, how can it be oxidized? Melanin doesn't oxidize very well, even in the UV region. So how are we getting this thin layer of oxidation? But what does oxidize melanin is hydrogen peroxide plus sunlight. So photochemically, what's literally happening is that there's a concentration. The infrared phone is enhancing the amount of hydrogen peroxide in that area. You get essentially an oxidized thin layer that makes it so that it's more efficient at actually breaking down the cholesterol into the various components. Now, what's really cool is if you go,
Sorry, I
if
just want to
you
say there's a big
if
difference
you
between getting.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I want to say there's a very big difference there than getting your vitamin D from sunlight in a pill then, right? Because what's going to happen with the
Absolutely.
conversion on the skin? What you just said is so important there for people to take that home and realize that the vitamin D that you get from the pill is never going to be the same as the vitamin D you get from the sunlight. Just never. So
Yeah, because if nothing else, it's not just vitamin D. It's
no.
testosterone, it's cortisol, it's all the adrenaline, it's all these things are coming up simultaneously that you're not getting in a pill, but you are getting when we get the right amount of sunlight. But what's really cool is that if you go to Senegal or Micronesia and you look at someone with very high levels of melanin, a lot of them will have almost a blue tinge to them. And that blue tinge, they've tried to say, oh, it's the indigo that they use. No, it's actually the optical effect of oxidizing that melanin in a 50 micron region. It's actually making a blue kind of like tinge, just the same way that a blue jay's feather has a black background with a blue photostructure. So the structure or the characteristics optically are different. And so they have that extra, because what does it take? If you have somebody with very dark skin, they have a hard time, actually letting the light in to do the vitamin D conversion. So, there's so many little tricks that the nature's using, it's humbling in a lot of ways. And us ignoring that is what I think is kind of a problem. There was a really great paper by Niedermeyer where he showed that, when we get an injury, the hydrogen peroxide, the first thing that responds is a hydrogen peroxide gradient to the area where there's the injury. You think about it from the standpoint effect of hydrogen peroxide and how it affects pathogens. But then that gradient then became the reason for the white cells to actually move to the region where we have the cut. So I'm just continually amazed that you look at something optically or, or measure it in a different way, you find that there's these complexities that we have not even taken into account in any way.
So
So,
incredible. Would you mind going over your theory again? Because I just love myself a good controversy. So how do you then see the distinction, like, or you said you don't see it as a superchiasmatic nucleus being the over the time clock, the master time clock. You said you feel like it's gathering data. Like, can you elaborate a little more on that?
well, I mean, that's about as far as it goes, as far as a good theory. I mean, give me a break. No, all I'm saying is that we're showing beyond a shadow of a doubt that melatonin is produced in all your cells. Okay. And it is responding to the stress level that, especially in muscles. Muscles are great because you go do some exercise. They have such a quick connection to the plasma, to the blood flow. So there, you can see the effect and see very quickly how it changes. That's not being considered in the circadian world.
Right.
They see it as the SCN light comes in 480 nanometers. The other thing that I'll give you real get people really ticked off is that is that everybody says, well, the IPRGs are responding to 480 nanometers, and so you need to get that nice little sunlight come down, our red sunset to get everything timed up to tell the SCN to do what it does. There's more 480 nanometers than any other wavelength at sunset. It just happens to be to your left, to your right, and behind you. And when you think about it, sunsets are blue. The majority of them are blue. And Bob did this really great analysis where he was looking at the scatter off the atmosphere at sunset,
Mhm.
and he plotted it all out. And all of a sudden, what you see is this amazing little spike at 480 nanometers that perfectly aligns with the absorption characteristics of the IPRGs. So it literally, and the cool thing about it is that is there irregardless of whether or not it's clear skies or cloudy skies. So the
Mhm.
body appears to have adapted to use the most consistent biomarker or indicator of sunlight. And that spike lasts for a time period into the darkening of the sun, as the sun fades, it's still there. But you think about it, the red's gone away, but I still have this kind of blue haze around me, whatever.
Mhm.
It, it's there. And then in the sunrise, it comes on early, and it has to do with the angle of the rays coming through the atmosphere and
Mhm.
scattering. And so it's inconsistent with the way they try and put circadian out there, I guess is what I'd say.
Mhm.
And that's
I
what I
just
keep
think
on
this.
coming between the rapid responses that occur based on lifestyle. And I mean, I had the sensor on at night one night, and I was watching a show, and then I went and I looked. There's only like 10 lux coming off my TV at that point. Um, and all of a sudden, what you saw is a series of cortisol spikes and a response from a little bit of melatonin trying to keep up with it.
Mhm.
But it's clear that very low levels of light can have a big impact on our hormone levels. And what do we
Yes.
all do? We all want to watch the TV late at night, and it's screwing around with cortisol levels that have in ways that has nothing to do with circadian. And I'm
Mhm.
not saying circadian isn't real. I'm saying it's incomplete and it's missing the majority of what's defining our problem. Because I would argue that, especially with young kids, you know, having them getting exposed to their tablet or whatever is part and parcel of the problem,
Oh,
especially at night.
absolutely. Oh,
But
absolutely.
so
I love
every
I,
parent out there can say that Scott Zimmerman said you should take away their tablet at night. How's that? That every teenager can be mad at me for.
Yes, good. We'll blame it all on you, Scott.
That's fine.
you're challenging it though, Scott. Like I love that you're thinking outside of the box and you're not just falling into this, this is it and that's it, and you're continuing to grow. Like I love that. So that's amazing. So thank you for that because that's how we continue to learn more and have know more. So thank you. And I
Well,
love
and
that.
I think I think there's a responsibility also from the government standpoint. They're causing this problem,
Yeah.
and I don't know how you fix that.
Yeah, that's a
Anyway,
that's a
sorry
that's
to
a tougher.
interrupt.
No, that's a tougher, bigger challenge. But yeah, and I love that you're talking about how the melatonin that's is not just coming from the pineal gland, it's coming from the cell, and the body's constantly repairing all day long. And if we're exposed to sunlight, if we're exposed to infrared light, that's going to help the body continue to repair better throughout the day, not just at night. And that's a huge takeaway for people, just knowing that being outside and being exposed to infrared throughout the day is going to stimulate that and help support that, correct?
Yeah, and I would, what we did during COVID is we did a series of computational fluid dynamics models because I was trying to understand, why is this big difference between people being outdoors, people being indoors, and the transmission?
Yeah.
And what you see very quickly is that it's not just sunlight. It's what sunlight does. People aren't aware, most people aren't aware, but during the day, every day, the UVC component is absorbed in the atmosphere, along
Mm,
with the infrared component absorbed in the atmosphere. That generates a low level of hydrogen peroxide and ozone in the atmosphere every day. So when you're
mm,
outdoors, there's this
wow.
huge reservoir that you're doing. And we had this really amazing case study where where he was, had been fighting leukemia, and his mom, he got to the point that he had this fungus that's
Mm,
starting to become quite prevalent in a lot of the hospitals. And it got into his lung, and they had to remove one of his lungs. And then it was started getting into his other lung, and they didn't have anything they could do. Antibiotics weren't taking care of it. And they asked Henry what he wanted to do because he was in hospice and he was only supposed to live a couple of days. And he said, I'd like to go outside. And so they moved hell and high water and they took him outside. And
mm,
lo and behold, over a course of several days, they continued to do this. The fungus went away. And, he's still here,
Wow.
that's
and the
amazing.
doctors could not for the life of them figure out how possibly it could have been. I would argue that the combination of sunlight and what he was breathing in was, and we're talking about parts per billion. You actually, OSHA doesn't even register the thing, but it occurs every day based on the UVC. And then at night, there was this work by Hugh where he measured very carefully the hydrogen peroxide, ozone, and nitric oxide. But during the evening, at night, all the microbes in the ground release nitric oxide, which is also a biogermicidal.
Yeah.
And so if you're sitting there in a campground, sleeping on the ground with your sleeping bag, you're getting essentially something that is nature's Lysol, I guess as I'd say. And it's very low levels of parts per billion, but it's there, and it cycles in, maximizes around 4 o'clock, drops down, nitric oxide kicks up. So sunlight is doing things that have almost that are tangential almost to
Yeah.
what's going on. But I would argue that that is one of the reasons that everybody should get something like a fresh air exchange ventilation heating system
Mm,
where you're
mm,
continually bringing in. And one of the reasons that I think
mm,
hospitals are so bad is that they tend to just recycle. They filter it for whatever, and then they recycle it. That's not the
mm,
purpose of fresh air. The purpose of fresh air is to fight pathogens that the body's been
wow.
fighting for millions and millions of years. And now we've isolated ourselves, and we're not allowing either the light or the fresher air to come in. So,
Quickest way to
anyway,
die. Go inside, shut the windows and shut the curtains and all the things and just watch your
well,
TV. Sorry.
it's
Sad.
what it's actually a woman that's the brainchild, the whole behind thing. Florence Nightingale
Uh,
Yep.
ran a
Hmm.
series of studies
Yeah.
showing statistically that the two components that are most important were fresh air and sunlight.
Yep.
mm-hmm.
And
All
you
over
know,
again.
she's smarter than everybody else put together, and yet she's totally ignored.
That's right.
I would argue it's
Yeah. It's so sad.
not part. It should be fundamental to how we design a hospital, how we design a school, how we design our home, and it doesn't.
Agreed.
It's. I think that's what people are missing. That there's this combination. There was a great study at Mayo where they looked at humidification during the winter for kids in classrooms. They humidified the room, and that room had 50% less illness than the other room. But what they didn't keep track of is I had that particular area, I believe, was using hydrogen peroxide in their water system to deal with
Mm,
filter to clean up their water instead of
mm,
chlorine. So the humidity that we provide, you should know what's put a little hydrogen peroxide in ozone. It's used all the time in wastewater treatment plants to kill bacteria and it doesn't take much. It's amazing how it's ignored. I guess is what really frustrates me.
It's really
So
sad. It's just
it's
tragic, actually. So I want to know if it's okay to ask you, like, knowing, I mean, the oodles of information that you know, how do you apply all this in your own life? What can you share with us that you're willing to share about your personal practices?
well, I don't know about you guys, but my wife has always had problems with winter. She's not a winter fan, and one of the simple things we do is that I don't know if you've ever seen you go to the sports to a hockey game or I mean a cross game or football game. Some people have these little enclosures that have clear plastic, zip up, they pop open, and you go inside. So every chance we have one of these little things, and she goes out there and lays out there or sits out there and reads a book, and it can be 20 degrees outside. Inside that little enclosure can be 70 to 80 degrees, simply if you're on a sunny day. And so, and you get sunny days occasionally, and as Glenn shows, there's kind of a switch that occurs where, you get a little bit and that gives you kind of tides you over. Makes sense
mhm,
logically. The body
mhm,
can't assume that it's going to get sunlight every day. But
mhm.
just going out there and feeling the warmth of it. And I've been telling some of our customers, and I got a picture back from a lady, and she set up hers in the middle of her rose garden, even though the roses were all.
Yeah. It's all
and
right.
and it is amazing the difference. I mean, it really is amazing. So that's one of the little simple things. Then we put our lights in. I never have, a TV on or whatever without an incandescent or one of our lights on it.
Good.
And so do we know all the answers? No, but there's some simple things. And then just going for a walk occasionally, get outside more, convince your kids that building a fort or tree house is more important than playing Halo. I that's just one of the things that struck me though is I got a call from a guy and he was working with battered women and in I think it was Chicago. And anyway, he said what people don't understand is women that have been in battered situations, they don't go outside because they're afraid.
Yeah.
And so, there's all kinds of implications and effects on this thing. So they have essentially locked themselves away for safety. And we were talking about, well, maybe there's a way to put a greenhouse up on the top of the apartment or something like that to where people could get out and get a little bit safely if they have their kids and things. But there needs to be a shift back to what nature has developed, gotten to over millions and millions of years. And it needs to be significant because I believe that the majority, or not majority, I believe a lot of the metabolic disease increases we're seeing are associated with us not getting the right light at the right time.
Correct.
And the other thing that like I told you with that TV, 10 lux, there's a misconception out there that everything is linear and that there's no way you can ever match what sunlight does outdoors indoors. No, you can't from a standpoint of, from a standpoint of linear intensity. But if you look at it from a logarithmic standpoint, it's a matter of simply getting more time. And I would
Hmm.
argue that that's not even considering the fact that what you're doing with the visible only is actually harmful. And that'll get me in a lot of trouble, I'm sure. But I'm convinced at this point in time that what we're doing now is actually harming children and shouldn't be allowed.
Oh,
The government needs to shift from a lumens per watt argument for energy savings to a mandated minimal amount of the infrared into children's lives and it's easy to do. Like I say, I mean, Glenn did it. He took a desk lamp. There's a workstation with somebody's computer, put the desk lamp in with a 60-watt incandescent and had LEDs everywhere else, no windows. That was it. All of a sudden, he's seeing these huge differences in contrast characteristics.
so if we take children who are, I'm just, thinking this in my head, who are playing video games, we know that's not healthy for them. We know the light's not healthy for them. We know that spectrum's not healthy. They need to be outside. But if we put an incandescent bulb next to them while they're playing video games, that is going to improve the outcome of what that it's going to help mitigate it, is what you're saying?
That seems to be what the data says. That's for one
That's a
biomarker.
really easy solution, parents. You don't have
Yeah.
to argue with them about blue blockers or telling them not to do it. Of course, you want to get them outside, right? But put an incandescent bulb right next to them and say, use this bulb while you're playing the video games. Use this lighting source at the same time.
Yeah, and the problem with that though is the government has mandated the elimination of all
Yeah.
incandescent bulbs.
Yeah, it's a huge
And
problem.
so and so that's what we've been pushing. Number one, incandescent is not the optimum solution. It's a combination of LED and incandescent, in my opinion. That's
Mm,
simply just trying to match the total spectrum because blue is not bad, green is not bad, red is not
mm,
bad. The problem is that they're never exposed to any of those wavelengths without an excess of infrared in when we're outside in nature. So exact combination, we use 3 to 1, 2 to 1, 1 to 1. I don't know what the right answer is yet, but mixing the two together seems to work.
mm.
And now, people can go out and buy a rough service incandescent bulb. It's kind of overkill, to be quite honest, from the standpoint of getting it, you can remember how much heat you fell off of a 60 watt or grabbing a 60 watt when it was hot. You know, that's
Yes.
why the right ratio, whether, if you're in direct sunlight, the ratio of in optical watts of visible to infrared is 1 to 1. When you get into going into the forest, it's about 3 to 1 infrared versus
Mm,
visible. We do 3 to 1 because of that reason. And also
mhm.
because I believe very strongly that children, especially children with high melanin levels, darker populations are being more affected than others.
Yes,
Um,
100%.
so that's I guess where it kind of hits the road, rubber hits the road. Um,
Hmm.
but clearly that if you want to go that route, you can do it. I could also argue that you taking the kid's device out and sitting in the outside rather than inside is another great thing to do. I know it's harder to see, it doesn't have the contrast, but that contrast and that brightness that you're looking at is pumping your cortisol.
Hmm.
If you take that same device and you go outside, the cortisol is not going to pump at the same rate. And
100%. Yeah, totally
Do
so
agree
you
with that
think
one.
that Scott, do you think that the like iris and those kinds of things help, or do you really have to put like I don't know how your computer is like I forget the name of it. Is it Waken? You have the orange sheet over your something like that.
Hmm.
a computer screen?
Well, my position is that blue is not bad. Blue is just the scapegoat. I think that if you have enough of the infrared in there, you can get away with you know,
Yeah.
it may
Mm.
help some people, and I don't argue, but it's just my opinion is that
Mm.
our real problem is not a excess of blue, it's an excess or a lack of infrared.
The lack of the
Okay.
red.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
do you, I thought the government changed their position on LEDs and it wasn't because I used to live in California and I couldn't even hardly buy, I had to buy the Edison bulbs. There was no incandescents. So is that not true? I thought they kind of reversed all that ban.
What happened is we put in a petition to try and overcome. At the last minute of the Biden administration, they put through a 125 lumen per watt rule,
Mm,
the rule change, and we've been trying to get it overturned. Trump, unfortunately, doesn't understand the bureaucracy as well as he should, because he wrote an executive order that said brought back the incandescent. He's
right.
Right.
being ignored. As far as I can tell, that they're totally ignoring him and going ahead with, because there's three governments, obviously, the one that runs everything, and then the Republicans and the Democrats. But
It's a good way
you
to
know, it's an unfortunate situation because in 2028, if they continue to do the rule, I won't be able to sell a light bulb like what I make.
really.
Because
Oh,
even
well
though,
that's
yeah, it's kind of frustrating because our light bulbs, by doing the combination, are 5 to 6 times more efficient than an incandescent, but I
Yep.
can't reach the 125 lumen per watt. And, some people are actually, it's just frustrating because there is no connection with HHS or the FDA or any of these places on this
What
yet.
can people do to support that? Do you have any ways that we can support that from not happening? Because we should have a right to having access to healthy light for our indoor environments. So is there anything people can do that you're aware of?
Well, like I say, we submitted a petition or a rule change to the DOE.
Hmm.
As far as I can tell, it's going nowhere. FDA is doing got a similar thing there, but it's ignoring it as far as I can tell. It's just, and the problem is that it's based on bad science. You
Yeah.
know, on top of everything else, forget about the spectrum characteristics. What ended up happening by them doing and forcing LEDs down everybody's throat? We lit up the night 10 times higher than what we used to because everybody that's cheap now, I put more bulb in there, make my house look pretty and all this other stuff. And so we've created the artificial light at night crisis, which is killing off our bugs and a bunch of other stuff. I
mhm.
had a neighbor that she had one of these
Oh,
god awful LED things that was like 10,000 lux or something like that. Yeah, it was unbelievable.
what did you do? Did you get her to take it down?
We moved.
Good for you.
It just happened that way. It
Oh,
wasn't
okay,
because of that.
okay.
But
Been
people
avoided.
don't know. They think they equate it with
Yeah.
safety, they whatever. But I mean, imagine if you truly believe what I'm saying is true, that is affecting testosterone levels, neurological effects, immune responses. And
Huge.
you're putting
Mhm.
all these things in place to save a few watts. It's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense from a science standpoint.
Mm.
And it's anyway, it's frustrating because all we're advocating for is to get closer to what we used to. I grew up in the Midwest. There was a few barn lights, that you'd look out across. Now you see everything's lit up. We got little solar driven things to give just the right amount of light, and it all adds up. It affects everything. And we need to convince people they should have gone, instead of doing what they did, they should have tried to convince people to use less light. And that would have made a big difference. To your point about the glass, that's even harder because the regulations associated with your glass blocking the infrared are
Yeah.
on a state level. So it's like 50 different states that all have, and local levels that mandate it. And it's critical to them meeting their leads budgets and things of that nature that they've been put under.
Hmm.
And it was so bad that there was a professor at Princeton that his office was one of those all glass windows,
Mm-hmm.
and he would literally come in spring and even some in a little bit in the summer. The way he's shadowed and all that other stuff, he would bring a heater in to plug in because he was always cold because it was
Mm.
blocking all the
Yep.
component that was going on.
The
And it's
glass was
unfortunate.
blocking. I just want to make people understand the glass is blocking the infrared, is what you're saying.
Yeah, all the low E glasses
Yep.
actually get their properties from associated. Now, it's frustrating because they could use double or triple pane. They don't. They use thick glass with a with a reflector on it, and that not only reflects the light out, but it also absorbs quite a bit of the spectrum, out in the longer wavelengths that aren't the coating doesn't affect.
So you're
So
getting like an alien spectrum is what's happening, basically. Not a
say
spectrum.
what?
You're getting like an alien spectrum, not the same spectrum that you would get in nature, basically,
That's
behind
right.
the glass. Yeah.
And I live in the desert, so it's so ungodly hot for 4 months out of the year. So all the windows have a dark coating on them, and then you go in, and I think everything's closed when I first came here because you can't tell that they're even
Yeah.
open. And you go inside and you're just blasted with this LED light. It's like living on Mars or something. It's crazy.
Well, we were able to show that during the COVID, for the first time that I know of, we were able to see death rates increase during the summer in in the states like yours.
Yeah.
Because why? You have air
Because they're
conditioning
indoors.
Yep.
and and you're not getting you're avoiding the sun at all costs. And we actually saw the seasonal peak and what was amazing is it happened in Arizona, Texas, and Florida. It didn't happen in Italy. Italy has only 5% of their homes have air conditioning. They open the windows.
Yep. You just gotta let the light in, people. Let the light in. Oh my goodness. God, this
Well,
is amazing. I want to touch on, because we didn't get to touch on this, and I really want to touch on this before we end, about the work that you've guys done with blood sugar and how infrared light is helping to modulate blood sugar. So I want to touch on that. And I also wanted to ask you about infrared penetrating, through clothing, because people think they've got to be naked outside in the sun, which great if you can be, but you still can get the benefit even on a cloudy day, even when you have clothes on, right? So just if you could touch on those 2 points, I would love it for our listeners.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean the clothing's easy for with Bob because he's shown, in true Englishman style. He has his shirt, and then he has his under whatever they call it, and then they have the jacket. And he would put a 850 nanometer LED behind it, and you could see with the camera, you could see it transmitted through, and that extends up into some of the longer wavelengths as well because it
Mm.
turns out that it's really water that's your main absorption. What I would like to say about that though is that one of the things that I think is probably the most fascinating is that um, the body, the skin in particular, has once you get above about 900 to 1,000 nanometers in the longer wavelengths, we all look the same. We have black skin with
Yeah.
white hair, and it's
Amazing.
because what it's doing is absorbing. It's intentionally absorbing everything it can in those
Yeah.
longer wavelengths because those are the wavelengths that align with the biological processes. Most of the biological processes that occur in nature occur
Mhm.
between 1,000 microns and 6,000 microns as far as an energy level. And so that range is totally ignored by almost everybody, or has been, including me, for a long time.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing that within that range, there's all these bands that are associated with the sunlight being filtered by water vapor. So
Wow.
it turns out that what we actually see are very clear bands in these longer wavelengths that are separated by areas of absorption. Why are they absorption? Well, that's because that's the sun in water vapor absorbs very strongly in very narrow bands as the light comes through the atmosphere. And that's a good thing for all of us, because if it didn't, then we'd have a lot of reactive oxygen species being generated,
Yeah.
because the peak reactive oxygen species generation rates occur within those water absorption bands. So now nature has aligned all its biological, appears to have aligned all its biological processes to these windows, some with different energy levels that tie in with how we get optimum health. We throw all that away when we did what we did. So, now how that plays into everything, we're just starting thing. Bob is having conversations with an amazing person. His name is Marcus. He's the oldest living Nobel Prize winner at 102. And this guy is sharp as a tack. I mean, he came up with all the stuff we've been working on lately. And he's excited because we're adding in a component that he hadn't really included. So I think that we'll see what comes of it. But the goal is to understand why the body is going to such, because what happens is that these longer wavelengths, when they get absorbed, when we look like we're black, very dark skinned, it's localizing the energy, all those photons in a very small volume. So that gives you this huge boost in the effectiveness. Even though those photons are weaker than visible photons, there's a whole lot. The highest density of photons in the body occur between 1 and 6,000 nanometers.
Wow.
and in these bands. So it's intentional, in my opinion. It gives an added advantage to the body, and taking them away is part and parcel of why we're having metabolic. Because at the end of the day, metabolic diseases can be directly related to electron transfer rates, which is what the Marcus equation does. So it's this beautiful transition of photon to phonon to reorganizational energy. It's just gorgeous how it all kind of plays together. But to your case about the glucose, it's Glenn's work, and he's published on it. Basically, what he did is he took and gave everybody a bunch of sugar. In other words, drink a bottle of pop or something like that, and then he exposed a small area of the back to 670 nanometer red light. And lo and behold, he monitored every 5 to 10 minutes how their blood sugar was going. And he showed how it versus the control, glucose levels dropped dramatically. And 28%, I think, with a very small, when you look at it, very small amount of energy, because he was only exposing a portion on the back. It was systemically changing the entire body. He also was able to measure the CO2 levels coming out of their breath, which is a clear indication of how much ATP is being generated and the efficiency of it, and saw a marked drop in our increase in CO2 levels. So again,
and we have a decrease in blood sugar. So it might be advantageous for people to use some sort of infrared or be outside when eating meals.
I think the Italians sitting out there on the porch with all the meals and pasta, that's a beautiful way to do things.
Yes, you love
Sign
it.
me up.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, it's very clear that the simple solution is to get outdoors more. And please, everybody, I don't mean go out and get yourself baked. That is not what we're talking about here. We need almost a class in sunlight etiquette.
It's infrared in the shade. Have to be in direct sunlight, correct? It bounces off the greenery, right? Am I correct about that? It
Oh
goes,
yeah, I mean the best place for you to go is to be in the park or whatever, on a sunny day and walk through
correct.
the trees. The
Yep,
trees are strongly reflecting the near infrared component,
correct.
but bear in mind, like I say, the most interesting thing for me right now is that the body is absorbing like gangbusters everything above 1,000 nanometers. And it's
Mm.
doing it for a reason. And it appears to be the direct link to most of the metabolic processes going on in the body. And if we can prove that, then you're basically saying one of the problems is everybody just equates infrared with heat.
Mm-hmm.
I feel warm. Once you start looking at the structure and looking how it interacts with all our all our basic processes, then you kind of it's like we're coated with this solar cell in the
Yeah. Oh, I
infrared.
love that. Hmm.
And it's in the same way that UV generates all these different components and even generates vitamin D directly in Vavo. Um, it's amazing how then it gets distributed throughout the body. Well, the same thing's going on in the long waves of infrared. We've been ignoring it, and it's a mistake. So.
Mistake. Totally agree. Well, Scott, this has been amazing. You are such a wealth of knowledge and information, and I love everything that you shared with us today. So really, really appreciate you coming on and doing this. Please tell people about, you have a light bulb company. Please tell people about that, where they can find that, where they can learn more information about you and, all of that. Please share all that.
After our conversation, I guess we're at www.niralighting.com, and
Hmm.
I would suggest that if I could just get everybody to buy one of our desk lamps, they're DC, they have two settings, one setting for daylight, one setting for nighttime. One is LED plus incandescent, other is just incandescent, and have that be on near people's workstation where they could just flip it on, get a little bit. You're getting 4.5 watts of the infrared, you're getting 1.5 watts of visible. It's enough for you to see good, read a book to your kid, whatever. Put it in one of your lamps. We have a version of it that um, has a conversion kit where you can take, if you have a lamp you like that has just a screw-in bulb, take out the bulb, we'll send you a bulb, give you a conversion kit, and it'll be DC. It has no flicker. It has none of these issues. We also sell an AC version because everybody yelled at me and said I had to make an AC version. Um, we, the BR30s and the BR40s are the kind you can just screw into your can light or whatever. We have an A19, that some
AC
people use.
version, no flicker as well, because the people might not know, but DC is direct current, AC is alternating current, correct? So, is the AC version also no flicker, or is that is that not possible in an alternating
Well,
current?
the way the AC one version works is that um, it has about 3% flicker when it's full on.
Okay.
But when you go down into the infrared, like an incandescent bulb, if you
Mhm.
have an incandescent bulb, it has about 15% flicker. But the
Correct.
beauty of the AC bulb is that you can screw it into one of your fixtures or your can lights or whatever you got,
Hmm.
and you can dim it. One of the things that people don't understand about the negatives of LEDs is we gave up dimming range. Used to be in the old days, you had a phase dimmer and you had an incandescent bulb, and you can make it very romantic, nice, well, you could, and dim it way down to where it's just like LEDs nowadays. They may do a color shift to try and trick you, but it does about 10%, maybe 1% dimming range. And sunlight is 9 orders of magnitude. So I like, if you put one of our bulbs next to an incandescent on a dimmer, you'll be hard pressed to tell the difference between the two because it'll dim all the way down into. And as it's dimming, it goes from, like I say, a 3-to-1 incandescent to visible down to a 10-to-1 incandescent, where it's
Mm.
almost all. You see that nice orange glow, but that's what.
I love it.
Well, that was one of my pet peeves about lighting is that there's so many things we gave up when we switched to LEDs besides just spectrum. We
Yeah.
gave up
Orange
performance.
glow. You feel it. Like, I don't know. There's something
Don't
about it.
you? Yeah.
I feel it. I totally get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet
So,
it's not
anyway,
as romantic, so that's a problem for the
well, if you're running on low T, there's a problem on top of everything else.
got a lot of problems there.
I didn't say that. I'm sorry.
Uh, all right. Well, anything else you want to leave our listeners with, Scott, before we end today? We really thank you so much for coming on. This has been amazing.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I appreciate the time. I always learn something. And, you know, I would also make this point, since you both are women, is that the women are much more attuned to this effect than men are.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, it's just, and it has to do, you actually have thinner skin and collagen characteristics than males do. So we're thick skinned stupid. And, you know, that's women. So if your husband or significant other starts to give you a hard time, just say, you have no idea what you're talking about. So,
Yeah.
but,
Oh,
and do try and get you know, those little enclosures are really great because they're thin, clear plastic. And, you know, they cost like 60, maybe 50 or $80. And
information.
yep, it brings it all in because the layer is so thin
Hmm.
that you
Mm-hmm.
get a good thing. And my wife will sit out there in the rocker, and my grandsons would go out, and we put a sheepskin down on the bottom, and they curl up, and they read their book too.
Yeah, so
So
sweet.
yeah,
Oh, beautiful. It's amazing.
lots of things people can do that'll make life better
Yeah. Yeah.
rather
Some
than
great
taking a
stuff.
pill. So,
Exactly.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful advice. We really appreciate it, Scott. Thank you so much for coming on. It was
Thank you.
amazing.
Thank
Yeah,
you
thank
very
thank
you.
you.
much.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank
Talk to
you.
you later.